On behalf of the International March of the Living, I am most pleased to welcome you to today's presentation. The International March of the Living is an educational organization dedicated to the memory of those who perished and those in an honor of those who miraculously survived the Holocaust. For over 3 decades, this organization has been committed to teaching Holocaust history to the next generation as a valuable lesson against anti-Semitism, intolerance, bigotry, and all forms of hatred. More than 260,000 participants from over 150 communities in over 40 countries around the globe have made the journey to Poland, visited the sites of Holocaust history, and participated on our annual march from Auschwitz to Birkenau on Holocaust Remembrance Day. Each year, they are part of an international gathering of almost 10,000 people strong, marching en masse with one common goal: memory. Memory as we march into the future. We believe their preparatory studies, their encounters with survivors, leave an indelible impression on the lives of all our participants, and as a call to action as they each become witnesses for the witnesses. My name is Phyllis Greenberg Heidemann, and as president of the International March of the Living, I am very proud of the work we do in facing and in combating the evils of hatred. I also believe how very important it is for each of us to recognize the valiant and the heroic efforts of those who risk their own lives to save the lives of others they do not even know. It is with this in mind that we at the March of the Living are very pleased to host this conversation on the important film Resistance, depicting the inspiring story on the life of Marcel Marceau, so brilliantly portrayed by the acclaimed actor Jesse Eisenberg. This is a story of true courage in a time of true crisis and carries a message on the importance of true commitment and the possibility for each of us to make a true difference. It is a message that we at the March of the Living teach our students and all our participants on the March of the Living each and every year. The discussion with Jesse himself and acclaimed film director Jonathan Jakubowicz will be moderated by award-winning Dana Arschin, reporter for Fox 5 News in New York, and our own March of the Living 2018 alumna. We hope you are moved by this conversation.
Phyllis, thank you so much for that introduction. It has been such an honor working with you, and I'm in such awe of everything that you do and the important work. I know we want to get to Jesse and Jonathan. I do briefly just want to tell you a little bit about myself. Again, I'm Dana Arschin. I'm a reporter for Fox 5 News here in New York, and I'm also the granddaughter of a 98-year-old Auschwitz concentration camp survivor. My grandpa, who I call my papi, has always been a very, very important part of my life. And I always, since I was a little girl, felt like it was my obligation, my duty to share his story and to remember all of my ancestors who perished. So in 2018, I went to March of the Living. I joined an incredible young professionals delegation. It was all young people in their 20s and 30s, and we traveled throughout Poland, and it was eye-opening. It was so sad, but it really made me realize that sharing these stories is something that I need to do with my life. I took a camera from Fox and I documented my entire journey, and I got back to New York and I was able to write and produce 3 short films that aired here on Fox 5 in the New York tri-state area. And those films really gave me the opportunity to be here today. And I'm so grateful. I do want to thank a few people before we start, people who made this webinar possible today. First of all, I want to acknowledge all of our distribution partners, including International March of the Living, regions and partners from all across the world. There are 4 very, very important women with March of the Living who I have to acknowledge. Phyllis Greenberg Heidemann, our president, who you just heard from, Monice Newman, our national consultant, President, who I went to Poland with in 2018, Liz Panich, Director of Programming, Ariana Typograph, Digital Communications Director. It has been so amazing working with you guys and talking about this day nonstop, and you really made this happen. Tamar Simon from Mean Streets Management also worked so hard to make this happen today, and IFC Films. And Jesse and Jonathan, I can't imagine, none of us can imagine how much you have on your plates, how busy you must be, and to dedicate an entire hour to us today is so meaningful and special, and it is a day that we will always, always remember. So thank you both for being here. We'll start with Jonathan. I'm just going to briefly introduce both of you. So Jonathan Jakubowicz, made sure to pronounce that correctly, and it was so nice getting to speak to you before we started earlier. He is arguably Venezuela's most celebrated filmmaker and writer. He's also known for so many of his other fantastic films like Secuestro Express and Hands of Stone. Jonathan, welcome, and just an icebreaker, tell us where you are today, and also curious to know how your family, I know you have Jewish, Polish roots, how you ended up in Venezuela.
Hi, well, first, thank you all for having me and for joining us today. I am in Los Angeles. It's where I lived the last few years, and my family is from Poland. Both my parents were born in Poland right after the war. Both sides of my family are Holocaust survivors and have most of their family killed during the war. They went to Venezuela after World War II and made a life there, and both became university professors. And I was born in Venezuela and lived, until I was 27, I think, in Venezuela after I made my first film, Secuestro Express, which, the government of Hugo Chavez didn't really like. And I ended up having to flee the country. And that's when I moved to the United States.
Wow, that's some story. And you're happy in LA, you're directing, and this is your passion, your dream to keep creating movies?
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy here. I mean, it's been a strange year, for everybody. LA is resembling Venezuela more and more with riots and looting and blackouts. But other than that, it's been great. And yeah, I mean, I always wanted to be a filmmaker, and it's been an incredible dream to be able to tell the stories I want to tell. And I have been lucky to so far be able to tell them, on a grand scale with incredible talent and with creative control, which is very rare in this industry. And I'll be happy if life continues that way.
That's great. Yeah, and you did such an incredible job directing and writing Resistance. I had the honor to watch it, and thank you for making this movie. We're going to go to Jesse, Academy Award nominated actor Jesse Eisenberg, known for so many of his great roles, perhaps most notably as Mark Zuckerberg in The Social Network. Jesse, do you get tired of hearing that? Also, a fun fact, you and I were both born in Queens. Okay. My family then moved to Long Island. I know you moved to Jersey.
Yeah, you look familiar, yeah.
Where maybe we're in the same hospital.
Yeah.
Where are you joining us from today?
I'm in Southern Indiana. I'm near Alvin Rosenfeld, who apparently is very popular in these circles. My wife and I live between New York and Indiana. It's a beautiful college town. Should I also regale you with my family history?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So my family is also from Poland, a little farther southwest of Jonathan's family, southeast from Jonathan's family, in a little town called Krasnostaw. Half the family came to America in the 1920, 1918. The rest stayed there and, died with the exception of one person. I'm so happy to be here today and speaking with you, Dana and Phyllis. And I love this organization.
Thank you. We're so glad to have you here with us. All right, Jonathan, so we're going to start really simple. Just how would you sum up Resistance? What is this movie all about? Maybe not that simple, but simple question.
Well, it's the story of how Marcel Marceau was able to be part of a network of Jewish Boy Scouts of France that ended up saving close to 10,000 Jewish children during the war. Marcel is an aspiring actor, and he gets invited by his cousin George Loinger, who was the head of the Jewish Boy Scouts, and he, you know, at first is not into the opportunity, and it's an arrogant artist who's only thinking about changing the world with his art. But as we follow the journey, we see him change, and we see him become a better person, a better artist in this journey. And it's a fascinating story about an artist who finds his art through the act of saving lives.
Where was the movie shot? And I mean, to me, it looked so authentic, like a town that you would have seen back in the 1940s. So tell us a little bit about how you're able to make all of that look so realistic.
Well, we shot half in the Czech Republic, half in Germany. In total, it was 5 cities, 2 in the Czech Republic, 3 in Germany. A lot of it is the work of an incredible production designer, Tomáš Both, who's a very close collaborator of mine. Most of the exteriors we shot in Prague, and we shot a lot of the interiors and the forest in the Alps in Germany. But it was, you know, an extensive process of scouting and dressing streets and finding the right streets that, you know, look the era. And you know, it's actually harder than it sounds. One has this idea of Europe looking the same for the last 500 years, but once you're there, you know, it's pretty modern. You know, the facades of the building, everything has gotten modernized, and it was a process, especially in Germany, because Germany was, you know, mostly destroyed after the war or during the war. And so finding period Germany is pretty hard, but you know, we had to travel a lot and found those places, and I am glad that you see it feel authentic. That was definitely the goal.
It definitely did, and it always boggles my mind, even when I was in Poland, to have such a beautiful scenery and have such horrors taking place there. So now that you told us a little bit about the film, we're going to get to the trailer, so people have a little bit of a background, and then we're going to come back.
Imagine fighting this war as a civilian. Imagine not knowing how to shoot a gun, challenging the Nazis to save lives. I have just heard an incredible story. That makes your sacrifices completely worth it.
123 children. Their parents were just killed by Nazis.
We need to train them to survive. What good does it do to teach them fear? I think it's important to help the children laugh in the middle of this war.
There's a group in Lyon arming themselves to fight back.
We need to find guns, we need to learn how to shoot.
Do you really think I could help anyone with a gun? Of course not.
But your passports are impressive.
Look at this. Marcel Marceau.
It's a great name.
Welcome to the Resistance. Why are we fighting a war we can't win? We can't kill all the Nazis.
You can kill some.
Or you can save some lives. We want to take them out to France to see if we can get across the border. Tell me where they are.
I don't know where they are.
You do know!
In every generation, they rise up against us. Sometimes a powerful man, sometimes an army tries to destroy the Jewish people. But here we are, together. You are not alone.
What's the best way to resist? It's not to kill them. It's to survive.
Wow. That's maybe my 10th time watching it, and every time I get goosebumps. I love that expression, the best way to resist, to survive. And that's actually how I feel when we walked on the March of the Living. It's, you know, we're defying them by being here and being able to walk and to march. So Jesse, how did you become involved in this project? What really drew you to this role, and how did you know you wanted to take it?
Well, I didn't know anything about Marcel Marceau. I, would be able to recognize him because he had such an iconic look, but I didn't know anything. I certainly didn't know he was Jewish, and of course did not know he was involved in this wonderful work, during the war. And so I read Jonathan's wonderful script, which, spoke to me as somebody who's an artist trying to reconcile how to be a good person and an artist. It spoke to me as somebody who lost family in southeastern Poland, right where Marceau's dad comes from. And as a Jewish person, who thinks about this stuff, and as somebody who thinks about, hatred and prejudice and how it can often take so many surprising forms, even in the face of the kind of charming Nazi in this movie, played by a wonderful actor who's, who's dashing and clever, and, and how evil can take that kind of form. And to speak to what you were just saying about, about survival being a form of resistance, and about how the March of the Living is a kind of perfect manifestation of that idea. While we were filming this movie, I took my my son, who was 1 year old at the time, and my wife to Dachau, which was 20 minutes outside Munich, where we were filming. And I figured my son was young enough to not, be scarred by, obviously, 1 year old, he's not going to remember anything or know what he's looking at, of course. And so when we were at Dachau, he jumped down from my arms and started running around the barracks, which were overgrown, because it's now, of course, a museum. And he was laughing as I was chasing him to try to pick him back up. And at first I was really embarrassed that my son was making this kind of, jovial scene at such a solemn place. And then it occurred to me that this is exactly the theme of the movie, that, the real way to kind of win, to take a kind of revenge and to resist hatred, is to, have this third, fourth generation, rather, running around a place where they tried to systematically destroy his ancestors. And so I think what March of the Living does is really special, and I think really coincides with the spirit of this movie and the spirit of my experience that day.
Beautifully said. And Jonathan, I have a question for you. Is it true that you wrote this script specifically for Jesse?
Yeah, I mean, I started, every time I'm writing something, I usually start finding who could play it, because I like to write with someone in mind. And I learned that Jesse, on top of what he just said, also is the son of a woman who used to be a birthday party clown. She did clowning for a living. She would paint her face in white and go to work. And I just had this feeling that Jesse was going to connect to this story, and I immediately started writing it for him. And as soon as I finished it, I sent it directly to him, and I was lucky that he responded, and we started collaborating and working together on the script for a long time. And it was a whole process of collaborating the script and his miming, and then the rehearsals. I mean, in the end, we spent a long time, which was very helpful, because by the time we came to set to start shooting the film, we were already very close, and that's always helpful.
Amazing. Jesse, I actually knew that about your mom. I'm kind of a clown myself. I went to a summer camp my whole life where I did flying trapeze, and I learned how to juggle. And I still actually was teaching juggling and trapeze classes up until I had a baby about a year ago.
Oh, wow.
But I was really, I thought that was really cool connection.
Oh, that's funny.
There's not many women clowns out there, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, she loved Marcel Marceau. I've seen him many times. For people who don't know, Marceau was performing up until close to his death, and performing something like 250 to 300 nights a year. And so my mom saw him several times in the 70s and 80s in Philadelphia and New York. She painted her face like him. I didn't realize, it's funny because as, as like her son, I think ignored what she was doing just as, as maybe a form of rebellion or something. And then doing this movie really kind of brought me in touch with the way she thought about performance, the way she worked on her performance, in the same way, Marceau worked on his performance. Both people, as you would know, Dana, like, even the silliest performances have like the strongest work ethic. Whether you're doing Shakespeare or doing a 5-year-old's birthday party, it requires, figuring out how you're going to interact with the audience and figuring, my mom was up every morning tuning her guitar, at 6 a.m. And so, it kind of, I would say, lent me this kind of the work ethic to get into the mind of somebody who was essentially performing something that was seen as very silly, mime, a kind of a beautiful craft, but also seen as one that could be equally valuable for kids.
Did you have any mime training before this, and how difficult was it to learn? How long did it take?
It took a long time. Jonathan found this incredible mime teacher in California, Lauren Salm, who is a former student of Marceau, who studied under Marceau for years in Paris. And he spent over the course of like 6 or 7 months, he spent a lot of time with me, teaching me about Marceau, and then also teaching me these incredible routines that he choreographed. So all the mime in the movie is original choreography, but it's based on all of Marceau's themes. I mean, to the extent that anybody who knows Marceau would recognize these gestures and motifs, down to the way, like during a gesture, that these two fingers are slightly separated. That is something that only Marceau did, that I do in the movie. And you can kind of take that tiny detail and extrapolate how detailed this mime was. And it was all choreographed by this really brilliant mime who is a student and still chronicler of Marcel Marceau.
So are you technically a mime now? Have you ever thought about performing as a mime?
Well, I have like a son who's a little older than your child, and he, it's an interesting skill set. So I perform for my son who likes it, who's young and who doesn't understand, like, my verbal, dexterous wit. And, but I also performed for these kids in the movie, all who spoke Czech as their first language. And so it was a way to kind of bridge the gap, linguistically with kids, the kids in the movie who didn't speak English as a first language, and some of them who didn't speak English at all. And in a way, Marceau was doing that. I mean, Marceau would have been performing for kids who spoke German and Yiddish. He probably would have spoken Yiddish to them, but perhaps there would have been a language barrier as he was French. And so, mime is really quite universal, even more than the cliched adage that music is the universal language.
Yeah. And I'm going to get back in a little bit to the children that you mentioned in the film, because I know there's a really interesting story about how you found them. But Jonathan, I had a question for you. I have spoken to so many educated people who knew all about Marcel Marceau in terms of his incredible career as a mime, but not a single person I'd spoken to had heard about his role in saving thousands of children. Why do you think nobody knew about this? Why are we just starting to learn about it now?
Well, it's part of it, I think, is by design. Marcel, by his own admission, was always reluctant to speak about the war, like many survivors. I mean, he was never in a concentration camp, but he did lose his father in Auschwitz, and the whole experience was very intimate for him. He even said that he later in life realized that the silence of his art reflected the silence of the Holocaust survivors. And I think he was never comfortable speaking about this. He was recognized by the Wallenberg Medal of Honor, and in that speech, he did speak at length about this event. But he was always hoping to be perceived as the creator of Bip the Clown, his character, and it was always proud about his artistic persona, sort of downplaying what he did in the war. And what he said in that speech is that he never really felt like a hero, because when you are in a place and you're surrounded by millions of people dying, the notion that by saving a few you are a hero is very hard to reconcile. And even though he clearly was a hero, he never felt like such, and he never made a big deal about it. And he was so famous as a mime that I just think people, completely, forgot about that or never knew about that section. And even in France, when we were starting to put together the film, we spoke to a lot of potential French partners, and they never heard that Marcel was either Jewish or that he was a Holocaust hero. And it's pretty mind-blowing, and I feel like it's one of the reasons why I felt when I learned about the story that I needed to tell this story, because it's an important aspect of him that people should know, and it's an inspiring story for everybody.
What's so interesting to me is obviously he was so famous that he wasn't someone who shined away from the spotlight. He didn't mind attention. So for him to be so modest in this way, I think is so inspirational, and it's amazing you're able to tell the story. I did want to ask you, how do you feel, obviously all these different Holocaust movies have their own storyline, but what really makes this stand out from other Holocaust related movies that we might see?
Well, to me, it was the fact that this is the story of an artist who finds his own art by saving children. You know, it's something that I haven't seen in a Holocaust film, and in a way, it makes the movie not about extermination but about salvation. It's the reason I felt I was able to make it, because being the grandson of Holocaust survivors, I always thought the subject was too emotional for me to take on the responsibility to making a film. But this felt so inspiring and so much about surviving that I felt it was the best story for me to tell, and a story that hasn't been told. And I honestly think there are still many stories in the world that are probably waiting to be discovered, and those are the ones that I feel should be made, you know, because we know about the other stuff, but there are so many inspiring stories that took place that, you know, it's important to recognize them. And also this is a story about Jews saving Jews, which is very rare. In as many Holocaust movies are made, they're usually about Nazis turning around and saving Jews, or maybe dissidents in Poland saving Jews. It's very rare that you see stories of Jews saving themselves or saving their own children or the children of other Jews. And I felt that is in itself very important, because at the end of the day, it resonates with me, and it made me feel that that's what I hope in their shoes I would have tried to do.
This is a question for Jesse. What was it like? I know there were some German actors in the film. What was it like to work alongside German actors whose parents and grandparents might have been on the other side during the war?
Well, yeah, no, thank you for asking that. That's true. But it was not just German actors. It was a German crew. We were around, you know, so even in scenes where it was all just Jews at a Shabbat dinner, you know, it was all Germans lighting the scenes. You know, Germans have, I mean, as everybody probably knows, they have a very strong sense of confronting their past. You know, this movie is coming out in Germany. So yesterday I spent the day doing interviews with the German press, and every single German journalist asked me a question that shocked me about being Jewish and what was it like to film in Germany. And everybody asked me questions that I think American journalists would be too uncomfortable to ask about confronting Germans and what was it like to work with Germans on this movie. This was German journalists asking, and they all said, you know, they really find it to be very important to reflect on the horrors of their past and their grandparents, and they take responsibility, and they, you know, seem to own up to it. And of course there is, you know, there's a party in Germany that's gaining power, the AfD party, that's horrifying. And everybody there who we speak to and who we know, are, you know, they're, you know, horrified by that and trying everything they can. But it means that hate has not gone away. Anti-Semitism has certainly not gone away in Germany. But everybody who worked on this movie was working really hard, really long hours to tell this story. And in some ways that says a lot about what their perspective is. You know, there were some funny anecdotes, like, you know, there was like a small, you know, corner deli, and we were buying some gum, and one of the Nazis who was like an extra walked in and was buying some gum with his full Nazi uniform. And I asked the guy who was selling the gum, I was like, this doesn't like horrify you that, you know, this guy walks into your store? And he goes, no, they film movies here all the time. And so I think they're partly used to that, of dealing with the fact that, you know, Nazi flags go up, or at least in Czech Republic, Nazi flags are allowed to go up all the time, you know, for movies, and, you know, they're kind of confronting it. And on the other hand, in a more kind of solemn way, there was a guy on set who was like a 6.5-foot guy. He was like the bodyguard for me and the other cast. And this guy over lunch one day kind of told me, almost embarrassed, about his family's history. His family, his grandfather ran a power station, the local electrical power station in this small town. And because he was the only one who knew how to work this station, he was protected. He knew the Nazis wouldn't ever take him away because he had to run the power for this town. And so he started saving Jews, knowing that he wouldn't ever be taken, that he would never be taken away. And, it occurred to me that, it's easy to paint Germans with a broad brush as the kind of the perpetrators of the war. And of course they were, but it's you can miss the wonderful, heroes who did far more to save Jews than certainly I do as a modern person. Without, obviously it's not comparable, but his grandfather really risked his life to save people. My family was saved by a Catholic family in southeastern Poland, and it's why my cousin is still alive, who still lives in Poland. And so it's easy to paint the Poles and the Germans in this kind of broad brush, but it's hard for me to do that when my family is only alive because of selfless Poles who risk their lives far more than probably I'll ever have to.
Jonathan, I hear another story in the making. That's really interesting. Jesse, you and I spoke about this before the webinar started today. And what was it like? I know you just touched on it briefly, but what was it like to be in the square in Czech Republic or in Germany and have, I know there were just actors, but people in Nazi uniforms all around you? What did that feel like? And did you ever for a moment just stop and say, like, where am I right now? Or did you ever forget that you were filming? I mean, it had to be very surreal in a sense.
Yeah, it was overwhelming sensorially and emotionally. For the most part, I had a feeling of great pride that, as an artist, as a Jew, as an actor, we're here doing this thing that I feel is really great. Not only great that it's important that the world knows the story, but also great that, we're in the arts and doing this thing that requires so much. I mean, especially for Jonathan and his wife, Claudine, to put this unbelievably large in scope, independent movie together is just a real feat of engineering, of artistry, of planning. And as an actor, I had spent 7 months learning mime. I'd spent 7 months with an accent coach, and here I am doing work to the best of my abilities and experience. And what revenge this is, that, we can put up these swastika signs and take them down. And have these actors, German actors, playing Nazis and to tell our story. I mean, to me, was this beautiful confluence of all of the things that I like about what my job is and what my culture is. Yeah. And then on the other hand, it was alarming. There were propaganda posters put up for movies like this movie Jude Seuss, which was this horrible Nazi propaganda movie. I'd never heard of it, so that was part of the set design, these movie posters that would have been up at the time. And so in a way, it was an education that I never wanted to have about these horrible, details of Nazi propaganda and, caricaturing Jews and demonizing Jews in the most disgusting ways. And so in a way, it was occasionally alarming because I would find these things that I didn't know about that were just depressing. And to think, Jews being paraded through the streets, contending with a mass media of the time that is designed exclusively to demonize them.
Hmm. You mentioned that, there are specific areas where movies are often filmed. Do you think anyone who lives in those areas ever might confuse any of these signs or these Nazi flags for real life? Is that even possible if they're going up there all the time? And is that scary?
I think, for a lot of them, I can imagine living in the Czech Republic and, every 3 months your town square is turned into, Munich 1942, or in the case of us, southern France. I think it must be alarming. Somebody did steal our large swastika flag when we were on a train station in Liberec, Czech Republic. There was like a large swastika flag and it was missing after lunch. And it's like the kind of thing, normally when something is stolen from a set, you're kind of alarmed, but you think, well, what are they going to do with that particular thing? But it was kind of more alarming to think that they're stealing something, A, that's probably not able to be replicated because it's illegal to make these kind of things in a lot of Europe, in Germany at least. And B, like, who the hell wants that? And where are they gonna hang that? You know, so it was a little more alarming.
Yeah.
But I think Jonathan would know more. Jonathan, did anybody ever confuse the set, or what is your sense of it?
Because like you said, somebody can walk, like the guy in his Nazi uniform walked right into a random bodega, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we were shooting nights in the square, we had a Nazi tank with the swastikas and everything. And, you know, we left the set there because we were shooting the day after, and the scene was, you know, closed. But some guy who was completely drunk, which is, you know, also common to find in a night in Prague, we found kicking the tank as if he was trying to liberate Prague from the Nazis, you know, and it was pretty funny because he was insulting the Nazis, saying they came again. But, you know, I think they're, like Jesse said, they're pretty used to it. But, you know, it's never an easy thing for the Czech and for the Germans for opposite reasons. You know, the Czech were occupied by the Nazis, and dealing with the Nazi imagery is one thing, but also dealing with the relationship between the German crew and the Czech crew was also complicated. You know, there is a lot of tension between those countries in regards to their past, and it was fascinating to see them working together as well.
Yeah, and shifting gears a little bit, Jonathan, there was a lot of violence in this movie, but I did notice, and I did watch some of your interviews, so I know that there was not a single drop of blood in the entire movie. So that must have been really difficult and artistic in a sense. How were you able to portray such violence, such intensity without a drop of blood? And it felt so authentic.
I thought it was the respectful thing to do. You know, when you're making a movie like this, I feel like I'm making a movie about my grandparents, you know, so I don't want anybody to revel in the violence of my relatives' blood. You know, there's nothing I would avoid more than making it exploitative, you know, and so I felt that it was necessary to have most of the violence happen off screen. And there is a significant amount of violence, but it all happens off screen. And what you end up realizing, you know, which is common in this type of movies, is that what you don't see ends up being more effective than what you see, because you're imagining a lot of what Klaus Barbie is doing, because he tells you basically what he's going to do. So it's easy to imagine what he's doing, and it's always more disturbing because the effect is not visceral. It's not a reaction to how good your effects are and how real the blood looks, but it's actually the event that you are reacting to, and I felt it was the right thing to do, and you know, we did, like you said, it was an ambitious effort, but it was, I think, the right thing, not only because it was respectful, but I also feel it's more effective for the audience.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, you just mentioned Klaus Barbie, and for anyone who didn't have a chance to see the movie, Barbie is the SS officer that was profiled. I researched him a little bit, and I know his nickname was the Butcher of Lyon. How did you choose him to be that Nazi that you profiled?
Well, I actually had spent a long time researching Klaus Barbie because he was able to hide in Bolivia after the war. And as a Venezuelan Jew, I was always fascinated by the stories of the Nazis that hid in Latin America. So Barbie was familiar to me for years before I learned about the story of Marcel Marceau. And one of the things that Barbie was infamous for was chasing Jewish children. In fact, he was sentenced for, among other things, for deporting the children of an orphanage in Iziu that ended up being sent to Mauthausen and killed. And the mother of one of those children is actually the person who recognized Barbie in the paper years later as part of a Bolivian group of businessmen that went to France. And that's how the Klarsfields, the Nazi hunters, were able to track him down and found him in Bolivia. So the notion that Marcel and those guys were escaping from Barbie was very clear to me, and it was confirmed by George Loinger when I met him in Paris. He was 106 years old at the time, and we met for a while, and he said that they knew that Klaus Barbie was the head of the Lyon resistance, and you know, they were sometimes, Marcel and George were sometimes in Lyon, sometimes in Limoges, but Limoges was under the same authority of Lyon, which was the authority that Klaus Barbie had. So the whole event revolved around escaping this guy who I find a very specific kind of Nazi, who is, you know, different from the ones that are usually portrayed, because he was very young, very charming. Even his victims, the people he tortured, you read their testimony, and they will tell you that he was trying to be charming as he was doing the torturing. And I find that very revealing about the psyche of human beings, and Nazis in particular. And I thought it was you know, a very important villain to portray in the film. And connecting it to one of the questions that I read in the chat recently, Barbie rose to fame by dismantling the gay, the underground gay scene of Berlin. That's why that he's introduced like that in the movie. And that's how he was later assigned to dismantle the Jewish resistance of Amsterdam, and which he did extremely effectively. And that's why they brought him to dismantle the resistance in Lyon, which was the stronger resistance in the entire war against the Nazis when it comes to occupied countries.
Well, it's so interesting. It also just makes you realize that there are so many notorious Nazis that you can't even begin to count and hear their stories. It's endless. And to think that they could go after specifically children, it doesn't seem real. And the more and more I read about Holocaust and watch these movies, it's like I feel hungry to learn more and more and more. And it's like there's never enough time. I want to shift gears again back to Jesse, and I want to talk a little bit about Marcel Marceau. And do you know if his family, I'm sure they did, but do you know if they did watch the movie, and did they give you any type of feedback on what they thought of the performance?
Jonathan knows.
Yeah, let me take that question. I mean, the family that really was involved in the film is the George Loinger family, who is the guy who invites Marcel into the Boy Scouts. George, his son, his niece were very involved in the research and really helped us a lot. Marcel's kids don't really speak English, and one of them, Baptiste, does, and I spoke to him a couple of times. They are engaged in a full biopic for Marcel that's going to focus on his artistic career and less about this event. So they are, you know, legally not really allowed to consult in our movie. So we don't really know how much they liked it, or if they were able to see it or not. The film hasn't come out in France yet, so until it does, I don't think they've seen it. But I'm hoping they're going to like it as well.
I'm sure they're incredibly honored that you did this. Jesse, what would you say was, I know we talked a little bit about this and you said that there were a lot of emotions running through you while you were filming, but what was the most physically challenging part of the movie for you, and then also the most mentally challenging part of the movie?
Well, physically challenging, I mean, this was an unusual movie because there are a lot of it's a Holocaust drama, but there are also a lot of very physical action scenes. We're jumping off the side of a cliff with a dozen kids. We're running through a town square after blowing fire onto a guard. There were so many scenes that were physically demanding, but nothing was as physically complicated as some of the mime that I had to do. The final scene, which is also told in the opening of the movie, Marceau is performing for 5,000 troops of General Patton. This was an event that actually occurred, and the wonderful choreography that Lauren, this choreographer, created was very particular, and it was very it was not just kind of particular, but it had to be graceful. And all the other mime in the movie could be kind of funnier or simpler, but this required a certain grace that I just was not, born with. And so it was difficult and it was emotional, but the scene was so packed with intensity. We were filming at this Congress Hall in Nuremberg that was an actual Nazi Congress Hall, built unfinished, but built to house, 70,000 people at a rally. So it was so fraught with so many kind of intense feelings that it was all right. You also asked about like the most emotionally taxing scene. The scene that that you referenced a while ago, that is in the end of the trailer, where Marceau says the best way to resist is to survive. We filmed that, I think, a day or two after the shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh.
Oh, wow.
And it was just surreal, because you can look at a movie like this as this kind of, period piece, and of course it is, and of course it's about somebody, who's a historical figure, both Marceau and General Patton, of course. And yet it seems like too easy to tie it to modern day hatred. It's pretty depressing to be able to, shoot a scene that we think of as so far gone in history and at such an extreme time, and that it has some overlap, to feelings that are, not only current, but seemingly spiking. That's particularly horrifying. And it was really sad to, do that scene. We live in southern Indiana, and a lot of our neighbors, just coincidentally, they happen to know each other, but are from Pittsburgh and had family there. No one was killed, but were in the room at the time of the shooting. So I was texting them that day, when they woke up in New York, which was about our lunchtime. Is your family okay? Yeah, they're okay, but everybody who was killed was a friend of my father. So yeah, it was just kind of surreal to put these two things together, and just a kind of terrible reminder that this stuff doesn't go away.
For that to happen while you were shooting this, I'm sure drove home even more the importance of telling this story.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't even believe it's almost 10:02, because I have literally 15 pages of questions for you.
Oh, wow.
So I'll start ending on the ones that I really wanted to get in today. A question for both of you. We can continue with Jesse first. How do you want this film to change people, and what is the one message you want them to really take away?
The thing I like about it the most is probably speaks to my life pretty specifically, which is just that, I'm a self-indulgent artist in the same way Marceau is. I was just on your colleague's show in the morning, on Fox in the morning, to talk about a audio play that I wrote, that I wrote myself over the course of a year and recorded myself in a booth. And it's just the most navel gazing of art forms, is to write an audio book and record it yourself. And so I'm constantly trying to reconcile with like how to be a good person in the world, and also be an artist that requires some narcissism in order to write the stuff that no one's asking me to write, or to act in a movie that doesn't exist prior to that time. So I think what this movie so beautifully shows is not just that Marceau is able to kind of put aside his art as he works with the kids and saves the kids ultimately, but that he's able to kind of integrate doing something good in the world, benefiting other people, and creating this art. And who knows, if he didn't go through this experience, what his art would have been. Maybe it wouldn't have been filled with the kind of pathos and depth of character, and perhaps even the sense of humor that he brought to his work, if he didn't go through something like this. And we know, of course, that art can oftentimes come from suffering and tragedy, and so in a way, I like that message of the movie. It's what makes this movie so special to me as an artist. It's what makes this movie special to me as somebody who's Jewish, but feels like there are so many Holocaust movies, so wondering how this one is separated from it. And I think it speaks to Jewish culture as much as it speaks to Jewish history.
Very beautifully said. Jonathan, being the director, the writer, is there one thing you want people to take away, that you want them to feel changed and moved while watching this?
Well, I think I would hope that people will feel like you can always take responsibility for doing your part in times of unfairness, and it's very sometimes frustrating to see the immense amount of abuse that exists in the world, and it's you know, easy to be overwhelmed by how little you can do against those in power when you are in a situation like that. But there is always the possibility of helping those around you. And I feel like that is what made Marcel and the Jewish Boy Scouts heroes, that they decided to look at what they could do to save the lives of others, and that became their resistance. It wasn't possible for them to overthrow Hitler, but it was possible for them to save children who's, you know, who will then be the survivors of this event. And I think that is what makes a difference, and it's something that each and every one of us can do, no matter the circumstances.
Jesse, a question for you. There has been a rise in anti-Semitism all across the globe. There's also been a rise recently in anti-Semitic comments in the entertainment and the sports world. I'm not going to name any names, but do you feel as a Jewish celebrity, it's your responsibility in a sense to put out messages to combat anti-Semitism? And then another question I want to ask after, which kind of relates to the march and a lot of young people who go on it. Do you have any advice for what young people can do to combat anti-Semitism or intolerance of any sort, or racism?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the country is having long, you know, overdue discussions about hatred and prejudice now. And, you know, I'm, you know, married into a really brilliant family of activists. And so, you know, so I've been having, you know, the conversations that the country's having for quite a while. And it's kind of a relief in a lot of ways that people are talking about things, you know, including anti-Semitism right now. In terms of my position, you know, when I started acting, I had like a real kind of, I think I had like probably an intention of not ever talking about being Jewish, because I wanted to play roles that were not specifically Jewish. And I want to think of myself as a kind of, you know, blank slate that can play different roles. The world has changed a bit. People are much more comfortable talking about their own identities now. And it happened to, and the world has changed, you know, alongside my feelings about talking about myself. You know, I don't like really doing interviews that much. I feel like it kind of runs counter to what, you know, the artist should be doing, so to speak, you know, if I'm being pretentious about it. But it's the nature of my job to do interviews about myself. And so, yeah, I talk about being Jewish now all the time, and talk about the kind of wonderful things that are part of Jewish culture that even people who are, you know, might have a kind of, you know, no knowledge of Jewish culture. You know, I'm living in southern Indiana. There's probably there's probably more Jews in South Sudan. And so, you know, I talk about it with people who haven't met Jews before, you know, or don't know anything about it. And they see that I'm these things that I associate with being Jewish. They see that I'm funny and compassionate and curious about their lives. Now, these are things that obviously transcend Jewish culture, but are things that I think are pillars of Jewish culture and real virtues: humor, compassion, curiosity. And so, in a way, because I'm a public person and a Jewish person, I feel like I have a responsibility to promote the good things that Jews are involved in. I work with the local domestic violence shelter here 4 days a week. And when I talk about it in public, I try to frame it as a virtue of Jewish culture, of helping those most vulnerable. I don't know that there are Jews at the shelter, but I think of it as a very Jewish thing to do, to help those who are most vulnerable, even and sometimes especially when they're not Jewish.
I think that's really interesting as you talk about your transformation kind of, and connecting to the culture as you get older. And I can relate. I feel like the older I get, the more I learn, the more I want to connect and share these stories. And I'm proud to be Jewish, and
right.
Proud to talk about it. There are so many questions I want to ask guys. Jonathan, we're going to go back to you for a moment, because I did want to talk about the children in the movie. I think that's so interesting. You found them from a local school. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, when we were trying to find the children, we were auditioning a ton of kid actors who had experience acting, because it's the first thing you try. But it was not getting there. You know, it was very hard to find the right ones. We were trying to teach them to sing Shalom Aleichem, and, you know, we were not lucky getting them to sing it. And we were in Prague, and I asked the casting director, is there a Jewish school in Prague? And she said, yeah, sure there is, but, you know, most likely those kids don't speak English. And I said, listen, I don't need them to speak English. I need them to be Jewish, you know? So we went to the school, and it was fascinating because some of the kids already came dressed like war survivors. They dirtied their face and everything. And in
Like for
fact,
their
many of
auditions?
the, what?
For their auditions, they did that?
Yeah, for the audition, they already came, you know, in character, and it was very moving. And a lot of the kids we ended up casting came from 2 different classrooms, so they mostly knew each other and spent all day with each other anyway. So it was very helpful too to find the group dynamic. And yeah, a lot of them didn't speak a lot of English, but they were, being Jews from the Czech Republic, all grandsons of survivors. So this story was very close to their hearts and to their parents' hearts. And when we met with their parents and shared the script with them, they immediately felt it was their duty to instill, you know, how important this story was for their families. So when we were shooting on set, it was, you know, easier than anything I've ever done in my life, because you told these kids, now you need to be sad, and they were immediately sad. You know, you need to be happy. They were immediately happy. I mean, they knew exactly where to draw the emotions from. And they also had a phenomenal connection with Jesse. So it was an incredibly emotional and effective shoot when the children were there, because of how close to their hearts was this whole story.
And that also leads me to one more question for Jesse related to the kids. There's this beautiful scene, and I know that you've spoken about this in other interviews, but there's this beautiful scene in the castle with all the orphan children, and you start miming for them. And I know you said these kids have no acting experience, but their emotion was so raw and it felt so real. So how did you film that scene? And was that what we saw on camera? Was that us witnessing their first reaction to it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, so when you film any scene in a movie, you have to choose kind of which side you're going to film first. So if it's the 2 of us talking, we'd have to decide, are we going to film your side first or my angle first? And so Jonathan and I decided, let's film the kids first so I can perform for them and we can get their natural reactions, because these kids are not, you know, trained actors, you know, used to the kind of manufacturing of spontaneity. So yeah, we filmed them, and for me, it was like this incredibly revelatory experience, because I had spent the last 7 months, you know, prior to shooting that scene, rehearsing these mime routines just on my own in my bedroom, feeling frustrated, feeling like I had hit a ceiling, that I wasn't doing them well, that they were boring to me, you know, like anything else that you're practicing on your own for a long time without the joy or you know, or interaction of an audience. And then I started performing for these kids. And it was unbelievable. These kids who I had interactions with prior to that, but not fully enriching interactions, because there was a language barrier with a lot of them. And suddenly I started performing, and their reactions were what was scripted in the movie. They start laughing, they calm down. You know, these are kids who are supposed to be playing, you know, kids who were recently orphaned. And suddenly they were engaged with me. They were funny, they were interactive. They were doing things that the Jonathan and the assistant directors didn't even tell them to do, but was so perfect. And for me, just selfishly speaking about this moment, it just flooded me with the feeling that what I was doing was funny and interesting and worthwhile and fun for the first time in months. The thing that I had practiced so much on my own suddenly had value to somebody else. And, you know, to take it a step further, it kind of occurred to me that if Marceau, who had been at that point, you know, in his life performing in these dive bars for an unappreciative audience of, you know, drunk adults, if he had this experience performing for these kids for the first time, it makes sense that he would then be so attached to them that he would kind of feel, you know, just this emotional connection to them. And it makes sense that he would then save their lives, not just because they were a good audience, but because there's something about the engagement with an audience and performance that transcends language and transcends any kind of logical relationship.
Wow. And I know it's 2 o'clock already, 2 more questions really quickly.
Sure.
If you could tell us about Bella Ramsey. She was one of the main characters and one of the girls in the movie. She was not Jewish in real life, right? And then she portrays this Jewish girl, and she's singing Jewish songs, and she was so natural. Can you just tell us a little bit about Bella, either one of you?
Well, Bella is one of the best, most talented people I've ever worked with. Her debut was in Game of Thrones, and she made a huge impression for the viewers of that series. And, you know, she said she became an honorary Jew by making this film, and I tend to feel that way. She studied a lot about the war and about Jewish culture. We took her to the synagogue in Yom Kippur, and she was very involved. She's very Christian and very spiritual, and related to Judaism through that. You know, she felt it was sort of like the older brother of her faith, and felt very connected to the whole story.
Beautiful. All right. So you guys gave us a full hour. Do you remember before we started today, I said, are we going to have enough to talk about for an hour? Didn't hit half my questions. I'm serious.
Wow.
I'm inspired and amazed by everything you guys have done. My last question is, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. You don't have to answer right now. Think about it. Would you guys, when life goes back to normal one day after this pandemic, consider maybe going on the march with me, and we could bring our spouses, and I think it'd be an amazing experience. Again, I was told not to put you on the spot, but think about it.
How old do you have to be?
So I know there's an adult group, which could be from 21 to 100.
Right.
They have specific young adult groups, which I was in, and I know there's a huge high school group. They're texting me right now, adults, young adult, and teen.
Okay, got it. I'm going to definitely do it.
It's amazing, including survivors who go. So
wow, that's incredible. I'd love to do that.
Jonathan, you'll think about it?
I'll think about it.
All right, well, thank you guys so much. We're going to send it back to our president, Phyllis. Again, I am incredibly honored to have had this opportunity today. Thank you so much. Jesse and Jonathan, thank you so much. And everyone who joined, thank you. You guys made us so excited to know that we had such a big audience. And I hope you found it meaningful and worthwhile.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you. Thanks,
Well,
everyone.
what can I say but wow, 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 wow. You guys are amazing. You know, I think the film is amazing. The trailer, for any of the viewers who have not watched the movie, the trailer had to grab you. And I hope that each of you find the movie. Wherever you can find the movie, you must watch it. It is not your usual and customary Holocaust movie. It is compelling, and it's a story that I think each of you should know. There's books about Marcel Marceau, and it's a very compelling story. I do want to share with you all, including Jonathan and Jesse, that we have two March of the Living alumni from 1989 who met Marcel Marceau in Bolivia in the 1960s. So when we say the world is small, especially when you're Jewish, wow, we at the March of the Living know that. I believe we're on today. They have watched the movie, and they, I believe, are on our conversation today, and perhaps have been as moved as I have. Like Dana, I thank you. I thank all the viewers. This has been a really cool, I'll use the modern word for an old lady, a really cool conversation. You guys are amazing. Jonathan, the work you do goes without saying why you're such an important and well-respected producer, director, writer. And Jesse, from the bottom of our hearts, as I speak for thousands and thousands of March of the Living alumni, I'll take it upon myself to speak for the general Jewish population. We love you. We thank you for all the messages you bring us, and the warmth that you bring to the Jewish people, from the Jewish people, to the Jewish people, for the Jewish people. We have found today to be special. And I invite each and every one of you, as Dana invited Jesse and Jonathan, I invite each and every one of you. We will get through this pandemic. We will get back to a new normal. I'm sure it won't be the normalcy we had in the past. It will be a different world, but we will get back. And I hope that as many of you as possible can come and walk with us on this incredible experience called the March of the Living, with Mitzad HaChaim in Hebrew. And I can promise you, because I've done it so very many times, that you'll make memories you will long remember from an experience that you will never forget. Right, Dana? An experience you will never forget, and have memories you will long remember. We call it the March of the Living. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on many more webinars in the future. Jesse, be well, b'hatzlacha with the rest of your career. Same to you, Jonathan. Dana, thank you, thank you, thank you. To all of you, thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.